Hi, I'm Jenny Hillier, speech and language therapist and mum of two, and I am here to talk to you today about how you can use the Let's Roll nursery rhymes in order to develop speech, language and literacy skills in preschool age children. First, let's talk a little bit about how young children learn language. So we don't need to explicitly teach language to young children. This is something that really happens quite naturally from birth. So if you think about an infant and how they coo and then the parent coos back, we start to build this lovely back and forth interaction. And this really lays the foundation for speech and language development. And then as children start to grow, it's really through the social interactions with the important adults and other children in a child's life that really supports their speech and language development. So every interaction counts. It must be noted, however, that parents don't cause speech and language delays. However, it is the important adults in a child's life that will help their speech and language skills progress. Okay, so let's talk about the benefits of using nursery rhymes and for young children. Nursery rhymes are something that you'll find in the toolbox of every speech and language therapist out there, but here are my top 5 reasons. Okay, so number 1 is, as we're singing nursery rhymes, we tend to act them out. So twinkle, twinkle, little star, climbed up the water spout. So not only does this encourage active participation, which is really important for learning, it also supports a child's understanding of new vocabulary. Nursery rhymes by nature are really quite repetitive, so this means that they create a verbal routine, and that's where we use the same language in the same way every time. This makes language really predictable and encourages children to try out new words independently. The nature of nursery rhymes means that there's a natural kind of rhythm and rhyme, and this is really, really important for developing phonological or sound awareness. So that's the ability to hear and identify the patterns in words, which is a really important literacy skill. As we sing nursery rhymes over and over again, they become more and more familiar to children, and this helps them to put a picture in their minds. That's another really important literacy skill, the ability to visualize. And then finally, we know again that nursery rhymes are so fun and engaging and interactive as we're acting them out and singing them together. And we know that fun has a really big impact on a child's learning. Okay, so let's talk about speech and language milestones. But before we do, it's important to have an understanding of the difference between speech and language. So when we talk about language, we're talking about receptive language, so the understanding of language, and expressive language, so that's the words that we use and the way in which we use them. When we're talking about speech, we're talking about the articulation of sounds in words, so how words and sounds are pronounced. Okay, so let's talk speech and language milestones for children aged 3 to 4 years. At this age, attention is still quite single-channeled, and this means that a child may really struggle to shift their attention if they're really engrossed in something. You might need to really come down in front of them and gain their attention. Children this age should be able to follow instructions with up to 3 simple pieces of information. And they should also be able to retell little stories in an order that makes sense using short, simple sentences. We do also expect children this age to be able to respond appropriately to simple WH questions. So what doing questions, where and who questions. And we also expect children to understand simple concepts and opposites like big and small, same, different, empty, full, clean, dirty, etc. Okay, when it comes to speech for 3 to 4 year olds, we expect children this age to be around 75 to 90% intelligible to unfamiliar listeners. So there may still be some speech error patterns hanging around. So really common will be children this age using an interdental lisp. So that's where the tongue pops out in between the teeth for those S sounds. A couple of other patterns you might still hear at this age are, one is called velar fronting, and that's where those back sounds like and gut sounds are simplified and brought to the front of the mouth. So for instance, a word like car might sound more like tar, and a word like go might sound more like dough. Another common process at this stage is called stopping of fricatives. So that's where long sounds like the S sound or the F sound are substituted with shorter sounds like the T sound or the B sound. So for instance, sun might sound like ton and fish might sound like bish. Speech and language milestones for children aged 4 to 5 years. So at this stage, we expect children to have more dual channeled attention. So that means that they can continue playing with what they're doing, but also hear and process when an adult is speaking with them. Children this age should also be able to understand basic why and how questions, although some of these will still be quite tricky for a child this age to respond to. We do also expect children this age to have a good understanding of some sequencing terms, so words like first, next, or last. Children this age will have more kind of adult-like grammar, although you may still hear some tricky irregular past tense verbs. So you may still hear a child say something like, I fighted or I goed there at this age. And then finally, with regards to sentences, we expect children to speak in, at least kind of 5 words per sentence, but also to be able to join these sentences and to be able to retell stories and join in on little stories or nursery rhymes as well. And then with regards to speech, we expect children this age to be around 90 to 100% intelligible. So we should really be able to understand them all of the time. So some of the little errors that you may still hear hanging around, however, are things like cluster reduction. So that's where if you have 2 consonants together, you might see a child drop one. So for instance, a word like spider might sound more like bider, and another process called liquid gliding. So a word like red might sound like wed, or lion might sound more like yion. Okay, let's talk about how we can use the Let's Roll nursery rhymes to develop speech and language skills with children aged 3 to 4 years. This is a beautiful open-ended activity, so there's lots of different ways that we can develop speech and language skills, but here's my top 5 strategies. Number 1 is model language. This might sound really obvious, but what we tend to do is ask children a lot of questions. So, what colour is it? And what will we do? And what will we do next? But it's really important to have a nice balance between modelling language and asking some questions. So the way that you could model language is by narrating what you're doing. Let's open it. Let's take it out. Let's roll it out. You can use linguistic mapping to add language to what they're doing. Oh, you're rolling it out. Oh no, it fell, it rolled away. Really important, and this is number 2, that we remember to never correct a child. If you hear a grammatical error or speech sound error, try not to correct them, but instead you can model it back. So say, for instance, if you're singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and you hear the child say tar, you can model it back and you go Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Oh, I see that star, let's stamp it down. Or if the child said, oh no, it falls, you could say, yeah, it fell and it rolled away, oh dear, So you're just modelling back the correct grammar and the correct speech sound. This will continue to build our confidence in communicating with others. Number 3, remember the acronym, observe, wait and listen. So the acronym is OWL. This is really important because when we hang back and observe and listen, we're then able to respond with genuine interest. This holds a child's attention for a little bit longer, and attention is really, really important when it comes to language development. Okay, number 4, when you're carrying out this activity together, it's going to be really nice to be able to sing the nursery rhyme as well. So remember to pause to allow the child to fill in the gap. So for instance, you have again, twinkle, twinkle, little, and pause. When the child becomes really familiar with it and they're coming in and they're using the word star, you can begin to hold back on another word. So you might say twinkle, twinkle, which will then hopefully cue the child to say little star. So all the time we're building on their ability to use language independently. Okay, and then number 5, when you're playing around with an activity like this, as you're talking about it, you can really hold things up to your mouth. So for instance, you can say, oh look, it's a spider, or oh look, I have the frog. So when you do this, the child is looking up at your mouth and they're seeing how your articulators move, and that's really, really important when it comes to speech sound development. Let's talk about how you can use the Let's Roll nursery rhyme to develop speech, language and literacy skills in children aged 4 to 5 years. Okay, so sequencing is a really important oral language and literacy skill. It's the ability to break any event or activity like this down into a number of different steps and then retell it in order. So the way that you can help support a child's literacy development and sequencing skills is by modeling some of those temporal concepts. So for instance, you might say, okay, first, let's get the Play-Doh. Next, let's get our roller. Then we'll get our nursery rhyme roller. And then last, let's use our frog stamp. So you've modeled all of these temporal concepts, but also these different steps involved in the activity, which should support their ability to retell that activity. The next thing that you can do is really think about emphasizing any tricky words. So say, for instance, a word like delicious, which comes up quite naturally for 5 little speckled frogs. So you might pick that out and go, delicious. Okay, oh, I hear 3 claps. Delicious. If you do this and you're clapping out these multisyllabic words, you're going to support a child's phonological awareness, but also their ability to produce these longer words, these multisyllabic words. The next thing that you can do is to really support a child's ability to answer some trickier questions. I like to, instead of asking questions directly, I like to say something like, I wonder why the frogs jumped into the pool. And then I might pause for a second and wait, or a few seconds, and wait to see if the children can come up with a response. And if they have difficulty, then I model my thought processes. So I might say, I think they jumped into the pool because the log was too hot and the pool was nice and cool. So just a really nice way to support their ability to respond and scaffold their ability to respond to those trickier questions. Another thing that you can do, thinking about language development, but also very important for literacy, is the ability to make predictions. So what you might say is, okay, so all the frogs are in the pool now. What do you think they might do next? Or I wonder what they might do next again. And again, you can model your thought processes. It's not a test. We really don't want to test children when we're playing with them, but we can really just pose these questions to them and then scaffold and support their ability to respond. The last thing that you can do is really think about vocabulary development with an activity like this. So for instance, you can name vocabulary. So say as something comes up like speckled. That's a word that's going to be really quite familiar to lots of children because of this nursery rhyme. but they may have difficulty actually describing what speckled means, defining it in any way, or using it in any other context. So you can pull that word out and maybe use some synonyms. So you might say, oh, spotted, look, it means spotty, speckled means spotted, spotted. But then you can relate it to their own lives by saying, I think I saw you with a spotted jacket that time, or I saw you with a spotted jumper. So that's just going to make it a little bit more meaningful for a child. And then the last thing that you can do is really help them use that word in a different context, importantly. So say, for instance, they're doing some arts and crafts and they're doing a picture. You could say something like, oh, that looks really speckled. That's a bit like that frog. Do you remember we were doing our activity with the 5 speckled frogs? All of these things will come together to support a child's speech, language, and literacy development. Let's talk about reluctant talkers. Reluctant talkers are children who can use their voice freely at home, but have really significant difficulty using their voice outside of the home environment. So these are children who will present as really quite shy and quiet. They may only use their voice with some adults. They might only whisper with one adult. They might not use their voice with adults at all and only use their voice with other children. It really, really varies from child to child. But it's really important to know how to support these children. So here's a few tips. The first one is to try to reduce your questions. Questions can really put a child on the spot because they know that you're waiting for some kind of response. So instead of saying something like, oh, what one do you have and what are you doing? You might say, oh, Incy Wincy Spider. You're rolling it out. I see the water spout. You're pushing it down. So you're still engaging with this child. You're still modeling all of this language, but there's no pressure for them to use their voice. The next thing that you can consider doing is using a lead-in phrase. So for instance, you might say something like, oh, I see you have 5 speckled, and just pause and see if they're tempted to use their voice. This will really support their confidence if they feel like they can even use one word. But again, we want to make sure there's no pressure for them. So don't pause for too long because that can have the same effect as a question. So just pause for a few seconds, and if they don't say frog, you can fill it in for them, frog. Okay, and then the last thing I want you to remember is to try to accept and acknowledge all forms of communication. So for instance, if you say, okay, what do we do next? Incy Wincy Spider or 5 speckled frogs. If they point at Incy Wincy Spider, or even if they look at it, that's really clear communication. So instead of waiting for them to use their voice, or instead of saying something like, you say Incy Wincy Spider, or use your voice, you'll acknowledge it and say Incy Wincy Spider. Okay, let's do Incy Wincy Spider. All of these things will come together to support a child's confidence and their ability to use language outside of the home environment. Let's talk about how to support children who are neurodiverse and children with additional needs. First of all, it's really important that we let go of how we think play should go and remember that all play is valid. It's really, really important as well that we follow a child's lead, because when we truly follow a child's lead, we can see what has their attention at any given moment, and this is what we can focus on, and this is where we can interact with them. You'll also notice when you're following a child's lead that so many children are really, really good at communicating non-verbally. So for instance, a child might bring the Play-Doh over to you, and that's them communicating they need help or they want you to open it. And that brings me to core words. Core words are a really important set of 200 words that make up 80% of what we say, which is incredible when you think of the amount of words in the English language. So when you're following a child's lead, you can really tune in, like we said, to what they're already communicating, and you can start to map these core words onto their actions. So a child brings this over to you. You can model a phrase like open it, let's open it, or I need help, another important core word. The other thing that you can consider doing is printing a core board that has symbols for these core words. So as you're playing, you can point to the core words. So for instance, you might say, okay, come on, let's do it again. Ready, steady, go. Another nice idea is to think about having a choice board so that children have a way to have some control and play as well, so that they can make a choice about what happens next. Visual schedules are also a really powerful way as well, just to communicate the sequence of events with children. Okay, so I hope you find that helpful and have a few more ideas on how to support children who are neurodiverse and children with additional needs. So I hope you walk away today with a good understanding of speech and language development for young children, and also how you can use a really lovely open-ended activity like this in order to support their speech, language and literacy development.